There is always good strategy and bad strategy. And the reason why I start this on such a high level instead of saying what strategic UX could look like and how you improve the design maturity as well as deliver on time is because one of the things which I always recommend to anyone, absolutely anyone I advise, and something I live by, is if you want to become more strategic designer, learn strategy. If you want to become much more outcome-focused measure designer, learn how to measure the actual product achievement and business acumen and things of that nature. You basically go back to the source. Instead of you seeking a book on business design, which you may be going to find 2 or 1 or like who knows what, like there's going to be very specific publications. We don't have that many. Go back to the actual source, something like good strategy, bad strategy. For the design specifically, what good strategy and bad strategy looks like, growing design leaders do and not do so well in a way is that they focus just on design. They don't think how does that affect product strategy. They don't think how does that affect business strategy. My own personal philosophy is that there is one strategy, and then that like business strategy impacts the product strategy, impacts the design strategy, the research strategy, and a lot of other marketing strategy and things of that nature. You ultimately have to come together with one strategic mindset and one vision, and then inform your bits and bobs which you do individually, basically, so that message and that intent and actions are distributed. This is super important. It basically tells you that you shouldn't isolate your design maturity improvements, because we have to go, again, hand in hand with what business needs to achieve. And I'm gonna give you a specific example of that, but chances are, just to outline, let's say you work at Tesla, gonna launch some Cybertruck customer experience portals for customers to customize their vehicles, which we deposited, $100 or something back in the day. That's where you would think as a design leader at Tesla, oh crap, this is a new product. You've worked with the product strategists and product managers to inform the product strategy and vision for it. But when else you take away into your design strategy and design org development and maturity and say, maybe we need to now evolve the design system into the design operations. Maybe we're going to need to hire a UX researcher. Maybe we're going to need to hire more designers to cover their workload, or strategically shift Joe from project A to this project B and kind of like quickly cover it up. But ultimately, that's how it should be, as a default. Don't make a mistake to being strategic on your own or for your own sake. You can do that, of course, and maybe you're isolated today, so therefore your strategy really is going to be how to get back to something what you see on a screen, instead of, again, creating so many different bits and being so strategic with setting a vision for design, but it doesn't resonate or stick with the rest of a business. That's the worst thing you could do, and it's going to frustrate you. It's going to make stakeholders look evil and devil and so forth, and and everything in between, basically. I hope that makes sense. Now, the good strategy is going to have diagnosis, it's going to have the policy, and it's going to have some sort of actions. You want all three, and ideally overlapping and ideally feeding through. So diagnosis feeds into policy, policy feeds into actions. Without it, you're going to have something like a mere to-do list if you go for actions. If you're just going to be diagnostical and gonna just nag and brag, is gonna be just that. And if you're gonna create strategic rule books, you're just gonna have it baseless, which doesn't stick. In between those, you're gonna be either too tactical and reactive between just diagnosing problems and taking actions, being too prescriptive or unmotivating, kind of discouraging other people to participate. Again, strategic efforts require a lot of manpower to implement. So if you just create a policy and take actions, it doesn't mean that it's going to stick to some sort of problems. And lastly, it could be too high level and not actionable if you get stuck between being diagnostical enough and then creating rule books, but not taking the action to make it happen. So to be good at strategy, this is your thinking, basically. You need all three to go and get that good, well-balanced strategy. Could be this, for example. I know this is very deep-fried and it's hard to see exactly what it is. A scenario here is brick and mortar stores versus e-commerce, growing e-commerce sites and behaviors of customers where people choose to shop online instead of going on the high streets to spend their money. Diagnosis would be e-commerce is providing greater value and convenience, causing people to buy less offline. The policy would be to turn the high streets as an alternative into hubs for your community. And then coherent actions would be to rent those unused shops, give the members discounted travel, X, Y, Z. So that becomes your good strategy if, let's say, you're a planner. Bad strategy would be just complaining that high street footfall is falling, and the policy would be to reinvigorate the high street. Then they start to rent, open fashionable pop-ups, things which people wouldn't care enough in that specific scenario. This is like what majority of the people would do. They would just invest in marketing and bad decisions, and then it wouldn't resonate, and just, it all falls down, basically. Everything strategically you do has to come down to those principles, because if you don't have principles, it's way too easy to default to your, reactive self and simple behavioral patterns. Like, how do you actually do it? And it was a good hypothesis and kind of like a problem he had. It naturally comes. You had an answer, basically. You know exactly what to do. You're gonna need to work hand in hand and carve out the time to do all those different bits. So for example, design maturity needs to develop over time alongside your product or service maturity. At any point, doesn't matter where you are in, the product shape up, or like whatever your startup or scale up or product management, let's say, or product does in the corporation, you're going to have some sort of phases to go to market. Or maybe you're already in the market, but the new feature is going to need to go through some sort of phases. If you don't think in phases, you should start doing so, because it's going to become much more easier to then set milestones, and then much easier to set the actions and the outcomes you need to achieve. So your products are going to go through the phases. It could be inception phase, like a discovery. It could be the design phase and then maybe launch phase. Or it could be that you're going to go through the strategic phase, the discovery phase, and then, let's say, product design phase before you launch it. So again, it depends on what challenge you're dealing with and at what point do you encounter that challenge. Because the things just scale, these frameworks simply scale. It depends how big the challenge is. Let's say if you need to, again, add a feature, take this, create the phases, roll with it. If you need to launch a new product, take this. Again, you're still gonna go to market somehow. If you need to launch a brand new startup from ground up, again, this applies. So you're gonna have some sort of roadmap, even if it's virtual. You don't have to put it on paper, because some people might feel kind of discouraged, especially in startups. And imagine that go-to-market is your business strategy. The product strategy would be to product shape up and maybe find a market fit. The design strategy then would be to increase the design maturity to enable it. Very important. Again, not doing design or development or maturity because internet says so. It has to be meaningful, otherwise it's not gonna stick. You're gonna get frustrated and probably quit before you make a dent in the universe of that startup, right? So that's why it looks so virtual and dotted on a screen, but ultimately throughout the phases, the product shape up grows and your maturity has to grow as well. Of course, it's going to be waves, and sometimes you're going to need to slow down and maybe think super tactical. Other times you're going to need to think super strategic, but basically you're going to go through these. And if you don't know what they are, again, why I left a question mark is because then you need to find out. If you joined a business and maybe they're a startup and there is no phases and you don't know what to do, well, you need to then set yourself up and basically act strategic, start creating these phases, start working with people, having conversations, quick ones, obviously not spending months trying to figure it out, but like maybe a session or so, and just kind of putting things down so that everyone's aligned and you can kind of then go away, outline your design maturity plan, outline what the product needs to and how to shape up, how to go to market, what you need to test, what sort of hypothesis you have, what research to do, what design to do, yada, yada, yada. That's tactical stuff you basically come to.